Hello everybody, and welcome to my preferred studio. My name is Hope Christofferson, and I do fantasy artwork. And lots of the time when it's not too cold in my neck of the woods of South Dakota in the United States, I like to be outside in the forest. That's where I derive a lot of my inspiration from. And if you've seen my work, I do fairies, dragons, elves, gnomes, a lot of folkloric pieces that echo of the forest itself. So I am an illustrator, and I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Black Hills State University. I'm freelancing currently, but as of the recording of this video, I'm about to move down to the desert to pursue my Master's of Fine Arts degree in illustration and animation. So I will officially be a doctor of art, which will be very exciting. But I love to learn, I love academia, I love medieval manuscripts and sharing passions with others, hence this YouTube video. So the long-term goal after the MFA is to teach as a professor and share the art of magic with inspired students. So I make work about fantasy because it helps me digest reality through play. I think that imaginative thought and creativity is a form of childlike intelligence that we should all tap into as adults. And so even though my work is fantastical, I try to employ realism and anatomical correctness so that there's an element of belief, even though when you look at it, you know that maybe mermaids aren't quite real, dragons aren't quite real, but it makes you question the reason why we have them in all of our stories and all of our mythologies. So fantasy illustration brings out magical thought, and that is exactly what we need in today's day and age. And I primarily work with watercolor, oils, and ceramics. I wanted to cover 3 illustrations. This first one is a field note done in a semi-scientific style. The dragon is done in watercolor, as are the jewels, and then I put it in Photoshop so I can add some text. And I love my field notes because I can really delve into the lore of the mythological creature and propose it as though it's fact, as though it's something that is coming straight out of the pages of some sort of scientific journal that an explorer wrote in as they traveled through mysteriously magical lands. So this sand dragon process, I drew it on a heavy-duty cold press watercolor paper, and then I painted it with multiple layers of watercolor, took a photograph of it actually with my iPhone, and then was able to clean it up digitally and do the research. So in all of my field notes, I like to put the origin, where the creature came from, so this Egyptian one, how long it lives, 1,200 to 3,000 years, they're very ancient beasts, and then it has a dual tone color scheme. So as it flies through the sky, I wanted to make its belly and the undersides of its wings blue so that when you look up, you can't see them. And then when they land and they curl up along the sand dunes, you can't see them either because their backs are gold, the same color as the glittering sun-baked sand that makes up the pyramids and the sphinxes of that area. So these field notes, I do a lot of them, but I wanted to talk about the sand dragon because it is one of the more recent ones, and I love the color scheme of yellow and blue, and it's really fun to take lore and apply it as though it could have existed back in some ancient culture. And this next piece that I would love to delve into is also watercolor, and it plays with the idea of chess games and virtual reality, and the idea of yin and yang and balance and the ticking of time. These two fish, these beta fish, are pulling us backwards. They're swimming counterclockwise, almost as if they're pulling back the edges of time. And then a checkerboarded unicorn is traveling almost as if through a wormhole that's switching its position in midair. And then the lake itself is filled with a checkerboard-like sort of background with orbs coming up through it. And then the mountains beyond have a grid-like system. So although it is a natural environment, there are a lot of architectural angles that pull the whimsicality into the geometric and scientific. And then we have this strange sort of god-like creature that's looking up over the mountains, gazing from the sky. And it was winter when I painted this, and I was feeling rigid, so I think that I needed this spider-like sort of web that resembles a clock in order to create something that was a little bit more whimsical, that had elements of planetary orbit. So Memory Pool is about delving back into memory and synthesizing what is magical and maybe fake and unreal with the real and the structured and the purely hard and synthetic. And then this last piece that I want to talk about is an oil painting that I did about a year ago. It was my thesis project as I was graduating from my art degree. And it is all oil, and it's 6 by 6 feet, so it's super big. It's life size, and I spent months in my house painting it. It was kind of during like a COVID time, so I couldn't go out and socialize. And there is a saying in Latin called memento vivere, which means remember that you too must live. And there's also memento mori that says remember that you too must die. So I wanted to call it memento mori, memento vivere as a way of remembering that life is very precious and you should take risks, but also balance that with a deep appreciation for just the fact that you can be around. So these two queens that are sitting, I don't know if they are in a fight, if the one standing with the dark hair is about to murder the one down below, or if she's going to give her her hand and offer her help up from that. Again, we have a checkerboard floor, taking that sort of game-like element and putting it in some sort of fantastical setting helps to bring some sort of play into the composition. So I included two little men in the background, and their flags say memento vivere and memento mori in reference to the piece's original meaning, and then inverted hourglasses and the Ouroboros in the horse's blanket. They're all representations of time and the cyclical nature of it. And I used to really, really love oil painting. So this traditional medium was used in the Renaissance, in the Baroque era, when people were obsessed with the concept of what happens after life and death. And we were battling the old gods, paganism, and blending them with Christianity. So working with oil paint for this project in particular was very fun, very challenging. It's not my normal watercolor, but just the fact that I got to delve in was very, very interesting with this project. So moving on from these things, we'll go ahead and start the next section of this artist video. So I would love to do a quick Q&A with you guys. There's been a few questions that I would love to answer. And the first one is, where do I get my ideas from? And the answer to that is everywhere. I spend a lot of time in the forest looking for mushrooms and strange flowers, the moss on trees, the grooves in their bark. A lot of natural things bring me inspiration, so I like to be in a place where I'm surrounded by all of them, and travel as well. I've taken a couple strange trips to Europe, to the old world, where I've explored castles and old museums and met very wonderful witches and wizards from different cultures, and they've inspired my work greatly. And music also, if I could say inspiration comes from a triangle for me, it would be the natural world, travel, the history that comes with travel, the culture that comes with travel, and then music. Music for sure narrates the visual imagery that I like to create. So there's a lot of flute music. I enjoy the Moody Blues and Donovan, and Beethoven is also wonderful. and yes, lots of instrumental stuff to narrate the adventure of painting. So what part of the painting process is my favorite? That's really difficult because I think it depends on the painting itself. If I had to choose one part of it, I think it would be the very end after I've done all of the big layering and I get to go in with very deep, vibrant colors and add the textures on scales or the ripples along hair or the shimmer on a hoof. Little details that add a glint to the eye that take the piece from something that's just flat to alive. It looks like it can jump off the page and become part of the real world. So that is my favorite part of the painting process as of now. All right, so here's a painting in progress of the mystical griffin, and this is on that hot press Arches paper I was mentioning. And like I said, my favorite part of the painting process is when I get to go in and take these and work on small details like this. So I like to use thinner brushes right here. You can see how it's very pointy, so it's called a round brush. And then I go in and I like to do details like the eyes. Some of these darker colors around the face are absolutely wonderful to work with. And feathers just are so dimensional as well. So I've been having a great time working on this one and playing around with the texture of wings and the juxtaposition between teal and gold in and of itself. What's the nicest compliment someone has ever given me about my art? I don't know. I think that I kind of blank out when people compliment my art. I'm not good at taking compliments, and I usually just sort of grin and smile and try to change the topic because it's just something that I do very privately in the seclusion of the forest, and I don't really think about it that much. So I guess the best compliment would be it tells a story. I would like to make artwork that makes people wonder about where the creature came from, what sort of world it evolved in, something that has maybe a Darwinian evolutionary tale, even though it's made up. I do like to study anatomy and what sort of evolutionary traits make an animal survive over another animal. So, and I use dinosaurs quite a bit to inspire the physiology of the creatures that I make. So when somebody says that one of my pieces made them want to research the natural world more, I'm just like, yes, that's cool, because if I can inspire someone to look something up and find their own passion, that is kind of the reason why I think artists exist. And the whole point of creativity is to engender more creativity. Okay, so which art supplies do I use? I love this question because I currently am working with the most wonderful palette I have ever used, and it's by Stone Ground Paint Company, which is based out of Colorado. They're a small little business, but their colors are so pigmented, and it's a very tough palette. It's made of metal. The individual colors are held in super well, and it just is so vibrant. I have such a selection. There's these wonderful gold colors too. And as for brushes, I use very cheap brushes. I tend to lose them quite a bit. So I'm using a Blick Scholastic Wonder White round brush, size 6, an unnamed brush. It's not even good enough to have a brand on it, and then another Scholastic one. But I also like Michael's Touch or Master's Touch brushes. You can get those at Hobby Lobby. So I don't really use sable brushes with my watercolor. I like to use synthetic brushes. And yeah, so that is the paint I'm obsessed with. Otherwise, Schmincke watercolor is great, and Van Gogh watercolor are excellent. I always use the dried watercolor. And I love Arches. I'm a huge French watercolor paper fan. So this palette right here, people see me carrying it around all the time. It's kind of big. It's this bright pink color, so I can be spotted as I tramp around the park or downtown or through the forest. But it is just wonderful. It is 100% pure cotton. This is a hot press, so hot press watercolor is very smooth, so it allows you to get detailed, realistic shifts in color when you're using your paint. So this is a griffin that I've been working on for a little bit, and I'm shifting from yellow down to blue at the bottom, but the paper is tough enough to hold up to multiple washes of color. And because the palette is a bit more high quality, the paper is bound onto it, so it has a thick backing so it doesn't bend if you want to take it out into the field. So I've been interested in hot press paper lately, and then I have this vintage drawing book from the arts and crafts movement. It was made in 1890, and one of my wizard friends from a thistle house in Deadwood, South Dakota gifted this to me, and it's wonderful because it has instructions on how to draw, and I'll make little images and drawings of it. So it's really great, and then I use the back sides of the paper to draw, and it has a very nice naturally colored parchment that makes me feel like I'm working in an old manuscript or something like that. So those are my favorite mediums, and then I just use high fire clay when I do ceramics. So this is the palette that I was referencing. These are the brushes that I use, this Scholastic 6 Blick, and then this unnamed little fellow, but it's gold, so that's actually kind of cool. And then moving on from the question and answer part, another art form that I like to do, as I mentioned, I'm going to go study for my master's degree, and it's in illustration, but there's also an emphasis on animation, which is the movement of pictures. And I love animation in particular because you can pair your art with music suddenly. You can make the creatures dance and sing and go along to a story that just you make up. So I kind of feel like a mini god, which is very strange for me to say when I make animations, but we'll go ahead and play a few clips so you can see a bit more what I'm talking about. And this is the book that I use to sort of write my little screenplays with my fake actors. All of my actors are pieces of paper that I design and cut out. And I'll give you a little tour of that right now. You guys, thank you so much for tuning along and listening to my rants in the woodlands. It has been absolutely wonderful to get to talk to all of you. And I'm just going to take you on a little tour out of the woods so you can see some of the magic as I see it. Some of the fairies under the logs, and the trolls under the bridges, and the dragons in the caves. So go ahead and grab your hat and your palette, and let's journey off into the woodlands. Try not to fall. So one of my favorite things to do when I go out in the woods is to shut off the cellular notifications on my phone. I just kind of turn it off, so if I need to use it for reference I can, but there's no way for the outside world to get in touch with me. And then I really just sit and kind of look at the leaves and wait for something to come, some sort of idea, because things that sort of seem pointless when I'm out around people take on a new and beautiful poetic meaning when I'm out in the woods. And when I'm in the woods, I like to collect little samples of things that I find really beautiful that I could use in some sort of character art later on. So I'll take those and then I will use those things and put them in my sketchbook later on. I've always loved ferns. They've been around for as long as the dinosaurs, much, much longer than most plants. And their symmetry is really beautiful because you can see it along the main spine and then also along each individual leaf that they have. So I'm going to collect some of that. And so little botanical things that I find when I go out hiking, I like to just press in my notebook as long as they're not rare plants like orchids or anything like that. And that's just a way of me keeping reference, because when you press a plant, it will just go ahead and really retain a lot of its shape. So I like to keep it in my sketchbook for when I'm ready to delve into another story. So when I'm designing creatures like dragons or sphinxes or manticores, they all need very natural sorts of textures for their skin. And I oftentimes look at trees because they have very animalistic like bark. So that's another place you can go for inspiration.